They told me they couldn't afford it, that things were tight, that I was independent enough to figure it out. So I worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, and studied on an old laptop with a flickering screen. I still made it. I still graduated. And when my name was called, I looked up into the crowd, not expecting anyone. But there they were, my parents, front row, clapping like they'd been there for me all along. I thought that was the worst part, until I saw the check they handed my sister at her graduation party 2 years before, and realized exactly how much they'd paid for her tuition. My stomach turned, my hands shook. So when the microphone was passed to me on stage, I said something I never planned, and their faces went pale. My name is June, and this story isn't about revenge, it's about truth. And what happens when the ones who raised you pretend you don't need what they gave freely to someone else. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, I hope my story helps you feel a little more seen. The Whitlow house sat on the edge of a pine-fringed street in Bozeman, Montana. It had the kind of polished charm that made it into local home tours. Blue shutters, a white porch swing, flower beds arranged in perfect symmetry. Inside, walls were lined with photographs, family ski trips to Big Sky, church Christmas portraits, matching 4th of July shirts. If you looked close enough, though, Jenna Whitlow's smiles always seemed a beat too late, too practiced. Jenna was the oldest, quiet, deliberate, always sketching in spiral-bound notebooks or hoarding old copies of Architectural Digest. She was the kind of kid who fixed leaky faucets before asking for help, who baked her own birthday cake when everyone forgot. Her younger sister Avery was all light, radiant, loud, the one who got the lead in school plays and won the Rotary Club Youth Award. Their mother, Deborah, often introduced her with a proud grin. "She's my little legacy," as if Jenna had never existed in that context. The day college letters arrived, Jenna found hers wedged beneath a pile of junk mail on the entryway table. Montana State, interior design. Her dream program, close to home, affordable, hers. She held it in trembling hands, rereading the bold congratulations, printed in blue. She hadn't told anyone she'd applied. Before she could make her way into the kitchen, Avery barreled down the stairs, shrieking, "I got into Northwestern!" The pre-law program, full curriculum. Her acceptance packet was thick, glossy, and already smelled like success. Deborah appeared within seconds, practically sweeping the envelope out of Avery's hands. "That's incredible, baby," she said, hugging her tightly. "We need to celebrate." That night, Jenna watched from the corner as the living room was transformed into a miniature party. Cupcakes from that overpriced bakery downtown, gold balloons spelling NWL, and a toast of sparkling cider in crystal glasses. Avery twirled in a dress she'd ordered just in case, as her parents talked over campus visits and big city safety. When Jenna mentioned her own acceptance, Deborah smiled absently over her wine glass. "Oh, that's nice, sweetheart. Montana State's solid," she said, before turning back to Avery and a laptop filled with dorm room mood boards. Jenna sat on the arm of the couch, her acceptance letter folded in her lap, the room pulsing with laughter that didn't include her. 2 nights later, a family finance dinner was called. The dining table had real cloth napkins and the special china. A candle flickered in the center, making it all feel more ceremonial than celebratory. Jenna's gut twisted. James cleared his throat like he was about to deliver a sermon. "We've taken a close look at our finances," he began, "and we've decided we can fully support one of you through college." Jenna didn't move. She didn't blink. Deborah picked up where he left off, setting her hand on Avery's arm like punctuation. "Jenna, honey, you've always been so self-reliant. You'll figure something out. But pre-law, it's rigorous, and Chicago's expensive. Avery needs our full backing." And then James said it, like a final stamp on the matter. "You'll manage, Jenna." It wasn't cruel. That was the worst part. It was said with the same casual inevitability as, "Pass the salt." Avery looked down at her napkin. Deborah nodded approvingly. Jenna forced a smile, a tiny twitch of the mouth. "Okay," she said softly. She didn't speak for the rest of dinner. No one noticed. That night, in her room, where the only decoration was a poster of old Bauhaus buildings, Jenna stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then she opened her laptop, its hinge creaking like an old joint. One corner was duct-taped, the spacebar stuck if you hit it too hard. She didn't care. She spent hours combing scholarship boards, community foundation pages, and grant databases. She created a spreadsheet, color-coded deadlines, and copied over her best essay into a clean document. Then, without hesitating, she made a folder on her desktop. The name was simple and sharp. "For me only." And for the first time in her life, Jenna Whitlow began designing a future that didn't require anyone's permission. The rain in Moscow, Idaho, wasn't gentle the morning Jenna Whitlow arrived. It came down like it meant something. Sideways, cold, and determined. She stepped off the Greyhound with 2 mismatched duffel bags, a roll of duct tape peeking from one, and a dented laptop pressed to her chest like a shield. No one greeted her. No one waved goodbye. Just her and a cab driver who muttered something about first-time freshmen and bad weather as he tossed her bags into the trunk. Her dorm was an aging brick structure with a crooked rain gutter and windows that fogged from the inside. Room 214 had a rust-stained sink, a mattress that gave up before she lay down, and a heater that worked only if she hit it just right. She stuffed an old sock into the cracked frame to keep the draft out and unpacked in silence. No care packages, no notes tucked into her bag, just a folded tuition bill that made her stomach turn every time she looked at it. By the end of week 2, Jenna had a job. Not glamorous, not even on campus. It was a part-time gig at Granger's Millworks, a dusty little wood shop a half-mile from campus run by a grizzled older man named Walt Granger. The shop smelled of cedar, turpentine, and stale coffee. Jenna's duties were simple. Sweep sawdust, organize brackets by size, and tape up shipping labels. But between tasks, she watched. Watched how the machines moved, how pieces of scrap transformed into shape, how Walt's pencil never left his ear. One afternoon, she found Walt hunched over a city form, muttering curses under his breath. "Fire inspection again," he grumbled, shaking a clipboard. "They want a new floor plan. My hands shake too much these days. Can't sketch a straight line to save my life." Jenna hesitated. Then, "I could give it a try?" Walt raised a weathered brow. "You draw?" She nodded. "Studying interior architecture. First year." He handed over a pencil and a metal ruler with a grunt. "Have at it." 2 hours later, she slid a sheet across his desk. Hand-drawn, clean lines, labeled exits, accurate to scale. Walt stared at it for a full minute before letting out a low whistle. "Well, hell, you did this freehand?" Jenna offered a small smile. "Yeah." The next day, the drawing was taped to the wall above the workbench. 2 days later, a customer came in. A woman with curly hair pulled into a clip and a latte stain on her sleeve. Monica Ruiz, owner of a cafe a few blocks out of town, paused mid-order when she spotted the sketch. "You do design work?" she asked, eyeing Jenna. Jenna paused, then nodded. "I do." Monica pulled out her phone and tapped something in. "I'm renovating. If you're up for it, I could use someone who sees space a little differently." They met that weekend. Monica showed her the cafe, sunlight-starved, awkward corners, but full of potential. Jenna spent 2 late nights sketching by lamplight, surrounded by textbooks and the soft hum of campus silence. By Monday, she had a concept. Monica handed her $60 in cash and a leftover blueberry muffin. It was the first time Jenna had been paid for something she created. Not cleaned, not packaged, but imagined and rendered with her own mind. That night, in her dorm room with the buzzing overhead light, Jenna opened her laptop. The spacebar still stuck, but she made it work. She created an Instagram account at JW Studio Designs. Her first post was a photo of the cafe layout, edges curled slightly, taken beneath the amber bulb at Granger's. Her caption was simple, from scraps to space. She expected silence, but a few hours later, a message pinged into her inbox. Eyes Hollister Chacher Urban Build. Fresh take. Ever considered freelance? Let's talk. Jenna read it twice before her fingers moved. She typed slowly, hit send, then stared at the screen until the glow made her blink. Later that night, long after Walt had closed up shop and the other student workers had left, Jenna stayed behind. She walked the length of the shop floor, phone in hand, recording the thrum of machines winding down, the soft rhythm of tools being hung on the wall, the creak of wood settling into itself. Back at her desk, she saved the file under a new folder, For Me Only, and titled it, First Paid Work, Not From Mom and Dad's Wallet. For the first time, her name, just her name, meant more than a formality at the end of a family group text. It was becoming its own signature, one project at a time. The moment Jenna Whitlow stepped onto the porch of her childhood home in Bozeman, Montana, the scent of cinnamon rolls and roasted turkey wrapped around her like an old memory. Inside, laughter rolled through the air, bright, unfiltered, unmistakably Avery's. Jenna adjusted the strap of her backpack and took a breath deep enough to brace herself, then opened the front door. The house hadn't changed. Polished oak floors, the familiar creak in the third stair, garlands hanging just a bit too early for Christmas. Family photos still lined the walls. Avery's senior pictures framed larger than life, Jenna's barely present in the corners. Before she could fully step inside, Deborah swept in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a seasonal dish towel. "Oh good, you made it just in time. We're just about to sit down," she said, giving Jenna a quick air kiss on the cheek without meeting her eyes. The dining table stretched from the kitchen into the living room, overflowing with food and relatives. Jenna was ushered to the far end, a folding chair brought up from the basement, wobbling with every shift. Her plate was half-balanced on the edge of the runner, inches from the dog's bowl. Across from her, Avery sat at the head of the table, laughing mid-sentence, clearly in her element. "So then, Professor Klein says, you've got the grit of a prosecutor already." Avery grinned, holding her glass of cider aloft. The room erupted in warm chuckles and proud nods. "She's got a natural gift, that one," said Uncle Brent, nudging James with a grin. Deborah beamed. "That's my girl. Born for the courtroom." Jenna smiled politely, cutting into her stuffing. When the conversation turned her way, she spoke quietly. "I've been doing a couple freelance renovation projects, residential mostly. Learning Rhino for 3D modeling too." Deborah nodded absently, already refilling Avery's glass. "Still at the woodshop, huh? That's sweet. Have you thought about something a little more practical? Dental assisting, maybe? Or IT?" Jenna didn't reply. She didn't need to. The conversation had already moved on. Vacation plans, Avery's upcoming mock trial, Cousin Ellie's engagement. It always moved on. After dinner, Jenna stayed behind to help clear the table while everyone else migrated to the living room for pie and coffee. She was stacking plates by the sink when she heard her parents' voices drifting from the next room, too low for anyone else to notice, just loud enough for her to catch. "Avery needs the boost," Deborah whispered. "She's our best chance at something really meaningful." "And Jenna?" James asked, rinsing a dish. "She'll be fine. She always is. And if not, well, it's not like we sunk anything into her." Jenna froze. The plate in her hands didn't fall. Her heart didn't race. She didn't blink away tears. Instead, The words settled like dust on an already long-forgotten surface, confirmation of a truth she had always sensed but never heard spoken out loud. Later that night, Jenna sat cross-legged on her old twin bed. The room smelled like lavender from an air freshener Avery had stuck in the vent years ago. One half of the room had become storage, prom dresses, old curling irons, boxes labeled, "Avery, don't touch." Jenna didn't touch them. She had no reason to. The only light came from her phone screen. She stared at a design she'd finished earlier that week. A cozy corner reading nook repurposed from salvaged pews and antique glass, designed for a woman renovating her bookshop in Lewiston. The curves were intentional, the dimensions precise. It was beautiful. It was hers. She attached the file to an email addressed to the architect who had messaged her weeks ago, one of those strangers who saw her work, not just her name. Subject: New design sample, JW Studio body. I may not have a sponsor, but I have clarity. Let me know if this fits what you're looking for. She hit send. Then she flipped the phone face down and lay back on the bed. Outside, the sounds of laughter and clinking forks drifted from downstairs, echoes of a celebration she never truly belonged to. Maybe that seat at the table had never been hers. Maybe that was okay. Because while they passed around pie and praise for someone else, Jenna was already building something sturdier. Her own space, her own name, her own table. The first time Jenna stepped into the warehouse on Division Street, she wondered if it was still structurally sound. Cracks ran through the concrete like old scars, ivy clawed up the exposed brick, and the overhead beams groaned in the wind. But instead of fear, Jenna felt an odd sense of belonging. It reminded her of herself. Weathered, overlooked, but full of potential. "Welcome to Line 9, said a voice behind her. Riley Tarrant stood there, arms crossed, boots caked with dried plaster, a grin playing at the corners of her mouth. She was the architect who'd found Jenna's cafe layout online and sent a message that changed everything. "It's not glamorous," Riley added, "but it's ours." Line 9 wasn't a traditional design firm. It was more like a creative sanctuary, a communal space where young designers, artists, and architecture students collided. The place smelled of sawdust and black coffee. Plywood models leaned against paint-chipped walls. Mismatched chairs surrounded a long table that had more paint splatters than clean wood left. Jenna was the youngest, the newest. But she had something most of them didn't. She'd already worked for every dime she had, and that grit gave her designs a kind of heartbeat others couldn't fake. Her first assignment with the team was a redesign pitch for the East Side Public Library, a neglected branch in one of Spokane's underserved neighborhoods. Most of the team threw out slick concepts, sleek lines, modernist glass. Jenna didn't say much. Instead, she walked through the library on her own, took photos of the old beams, the light filtering through dirty windows, the cracked tiles still clinging to 1950s color palettes. At the next meeting, she unrolled her design by hand. A soft canopy of reclaimed beams would frame the reading room. Light fixtures crafted from wine bottles would throw a warm, dappled glow like sunlight through leaves. She called it a library of belonging. Riley stared at the concept in silence. "You did this freehand?" Jenna nodded, bracing for critique. Instead, Riley tapped the paper. This is why we exist." A few days later, the team visited the site again. As they walked the perimeter, a man in a corduroy blazer and worn leather boots stepped through the double doors. "Line 9?" he asked. "I've been hearing about you." It was Professor Harlan Beck from the University of Washington's School of Built Environments. Word had spread about Line 9's grassroots approach, and he'd come to see what was real. As he circled Jenna's mock-up, he paused. "Who designed the lighting concept?" he asked. Jenna raised her hand. "Jenna Whitlow, undergrad, University of Idaho." He looked at her for a moment. Ever thought about research in adaptive reuse? We've got a project in Wenatchee that could use a fresh lens. That night, Jenna wrote possibility in the margins of her sketchbook, something she hadn't dared name in a long time. The weeks that followed blurred into late nights and early mornings. Jenna bounced between studio meetings, freelance gigs, and her part-time research work for Beck's urban revitalization project. She was learning not just how to draw better lines, but how to stand by them. Then one Wednesday afternoon, Riley rushed into the studio with a folded city bulletin in hand. "Spokane Civic Center redesign," she said breathlessly. "City-funded, huge visibility. They're accepting proposals from community-based teams." Excitement rippled through the room. For a moment, Jenna just sat still. She knew that building, the Civic Center. It was where her father, James Whitlow, worked, facilities and operations. It was a place where her name had likely never been mentioned. Not in design meetings, not in elevator chats, not in casual lunchroom conversations. She'd been invisible there too. She didn't say a word. When it came time to nominate a team lead for the proposal, there was no debate. "I nominate Jenna," Riley said without hesitation. Jenna stood in front of the internal review committee with nothing but a foam core board, hand-labeled and textured with swatches of salvaged materials. Her voice didn't shake. Her vision wasn't flashy. It was honest. A community-first layout, reused textures, circulation paths designed for families, not just function. 3 other firms came with animated walkthroughs and PowerPoint decks slick enough to belong at a tech launch. But Jenna's design told a story, the kind of story that didn't need sound effects to land. At the end of the session, the committee chose hers. Not because it was the most polished, but because it felt like Spokane. It honored what was already there and gave it room to breathe. Back at line 9 that night, Jenna sat in the glow of her laptop screen. She pulled up the proposal layout, checked margins, typed in the title. Below it, in bold, she added, "J. Whitlow, lead designer." This time, the name didn't feel borrowed or burdensome. It wasn't a hand-me-down from a family tree that never knew what to do with her. It felt earned. It felt like the start of something permanent. The call came on a foggy Sunday morning, just as the sun started bleeding into the skyline over Spokane. Jenna wasn't trying to listen in, but the hallway outside her parents' kitchen had always been an amplifier of secrets. She heard Avery's voice, shaky, unsteady, thinner than usual. "I didn't know the paper was plagiarized," she said. "They're calling it academic misconduct. I didn't mean to." Jenna didn't need the full conversation. She already knew the tone. She'd heard it enough growing up, when Avery twisted truths, and their parents twisted them further to fit a palatable story. By lunchtime, the official narrative had taken shape. Deborah stood at the head of the table, flipping the roast in the pan like she was on a morning show. "Avery's decided to take a wellness semester," she announced with a serene smile. "She's prioritizing her mental health." James nodded, adding, "It's just a small pause. Nothing to worry about. We still believe in her potential." Jenna didn't speak. She just watched as the room quietly digested the news, the same way they did everything in that house, selectively. The truth, of course, was simpler and far less flattering. Avery had been caught submitting a term paper written by someone else. It was a sloppy, lazy choice, and the university's plagiarism board hadn't needed long to hand down a suspension for the upcoming semester. Her spotless record? Cracked. Her golden child glow? Fading under the weight of her own shortcuts. Meanwhile, Jenna's world was moving in the opposite direction, not flashy, but steady. She had just returned from a seminar hosted by Professor Harlan Beck, where she presented a proposal on modular, sustainable public furniture. It was a blend of reclaimed materials and urban functionality, an idea that came to her during late-night sketch sessions at Line 9 and long rides on the city bus through underserved neighborhoods. She stood in front of a panel of architects and civic planners, explaining how each module could adapt to community needs. Spaces for rest, for shelter, for gathering. No frills, just function and warmth. After her Q&A, one of the judges leaned in. "Have you applied for the Northwest Designers Fellowship?" Jenna blinked. "No, I didn't think I was eligible." "You are," he said, "and if you're selected, it covers full tuition for your senior year." She nodded slowly, still stunned. It wasn't just about the money, though that part mattered more than she'd admit. It was that someone saw her work as worth investing in. Someone outside her family, outside her world. She went home the following weekend, back to the same house where her designs were still invisible. Avery remained mostly in her bedroom, recovering, according to Deborah. Whenever visitors called, Deborah spun a warm story about intentional rest, leaving out the ethics board and the letter of suspension. At dinner, Jenna mentioned, almost offhand, "I'm presenting the Civic Center redesign next week. I'm the lead for Line 9. James looked up from his mashed potatoes. "Civic Center? That's where I work. I assume they're just doing some outreach, getting students involved in mock planning. Good practice for you." The words weren't cruel. That was what made them worse. They were brushed with encouragement but baked in condescension, like a pat on the head that said, "Don't get ahead of yourself." Jenna smiled lightly, like she always did. She knew by now how to take that flick of doubt and turn it into drive. Back at her apartment in Spokane the next day, she opened her laptop to find a new email waiting. Subject: Civic Center Project, Stage 2, Confirmation Body. Congratulations. Your proposal has been selected to move forward for public presentation. You will represent Line 9 as lead designer. CC, James Whitlow, Facilities Supervisor. Internal notification. She read it twice, then again. It wasn't just a milestone, it was the first time her father had to know about her work. Not because she told him, not because he asked, but because the system he served now required him to acknowledge her. She didn't forward the email, didn't screenshot it, didn't call home. Instead, she saved it into a folder labeled Confirmed and went back to her sketch pad. Her mind drifted to new renderings, new shapes, new community zones, because not everything needed to be announced. Some victories weren't meant for applause, they were meant for building. Quietly, steadily, brick by honest brick. City Hall in Spokane hadn't seen a crowd this large for a design review in years. The final presentation for the Civic Center redesign drew architects, public planners, neighborhood reps, and more than a few curious residents who wanted to know how the face of their downtown might change. Under the dome of amber lights and the quiet hum of anticipation, Jenna Whitlow sat in the front section, not quite hidden, but far from the center. Her outfit was deliberately plain, black slacks, a white button-down shirt with sleeves rolled neatly at the cuffs. No heels, no jewelry. Her hair pulled back in a low, clean bun. She looked more like someone there to adjust the mic than deliver the headline presentation, but that was the point. She wasn't here for theatrics. She was here for the work. Across the aisle, her father, James Whitlow, took his seat in the reserved row for city administrators. He nodded along as the mayor whispered something into his ear, flipping through the program with one hand. Then he stopped. There it was. Finalist presentation, Studio Line 9, Jenna Whitlow, lead designer. His eyes paused on the name. No shift in posture, no expression of surprise. Just a subtle tightening in the jaw before he lifted his gaze and scanned the room. His eyes found hers. Brief, flat, no nod, no acknowledgement. Then he turned back toward the podium as if he hadn't seen her at all. When her name was announced, Jenna stood. She didn't carry note cards. She didn't need them. She walked to the microphone, took a breath so quiet only she heard it, and began. not with pleasantries, not with formal thanks. "This building," she said, her voice steady, "raised me more than my home did." The room fell still. Even the shuffling of papers ceased. She spoke of after-school hours spent in the Civic Center's public library wing, curled in a chair under east-facing windows, sketching shapes on paper no one would ever see. She told of how that filtered morning light became her first mentor, how the silence of a space no one claimed made her feel, for the first time, like she could exist fully without explanation. "That light," she continued, "taught me something my home didn't, that spaces can hold you when people won't." Somewhere in the front row, James shifted slightly in his chair. Jenna didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She moved on, walking the committee and the crowd through her concept. The Civic Center, she explained, didn't need reinvention. It needed reclamation. Her design preserved original structures, exposed forgotten skylights, and layered sustainable elements to enhance what was already there. Every part of the plan pointed back to memory, intention, and quiet dignity. When she finished, there was a beat of silence. Then slowly, applause. It swelled. The mayor stood. Then the selection committee. Then the audience. Jenna didn't smile. She bowed her head once in acknowledgement, then stepped back as the moderator returned to the mic. "We are pleased to announce," the MC said, "that Studio Line 9's proposal, led by Jenna Whitlow, received the highest evaluation and will receive the pilot grant for development." From the corner of her eye, she saw the man seated beside her father lean over. "That's your daughter?" he asked. "Man, you must be proud." James let out a short, quiet laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah," he said, eyes still fixed ahead. "She's persistent." That night, Jenna went home, not to her studio in Spokane, but back to Bozeman at her mother's request. Deborah had called earlier that week, her voice sugared. "We're planning a little dinner, just us, to celebrate your thing. Come home for a night, okay?" The house was warm, smelled like garlic bread and rotisserie chicken. Avery was slouched on the couch, scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up as Jenna walked in. At the table, the conversation was half-hearted. Jenna waited for someone to bring it up. They didn't. So she did. "I presented the Civic Center pitch yesterday," she said. "They selected my design." Avery didn't look up. "You don't have to stand in front of hundreds of people to prove you're good at something, you know." Deborah chimed in, slicing the chicken. "It's nice, honey, but don't let it go to your head. Sometimes things are just timing. Right place, right time." No one asked what she said in the speech. No one asked to see the mock-ups. No one said they were proud. Jenna picked at her food. The peas rolled to the edge of her plate, untouched. She realized, quietly and without anger, that they weren't celebrating her. They were tolerating her. Her success didn't inspire them. It unsettled them. It disrupted the narrative they'd built around her, where she struggled, stayed quiet, and never rose far enough to make them uncomfortable. She didn't need their applause anymore. The city had already stood up. The spring air in Bozeman smelled of blooming crabapple trees and freshly mowed lawns, like something out of a nostalgic postcard. Jenna Whitlow stepped out of the rental car with a quiet breath, smoothing the skirt of her slate blue dress. She wasn't here for herself. She was here for Avery's graduation, at least, the ceremony. The truth? Avery had been suspended and wouldn't be receiving a diploma this semester. But no one in the Whitlow household intended to let facts ruin a good picture. "We'll attend, take the photos, keep spirits high," Deborah had said on the phone, like orchestrating a press release. Inside the auditorium, the stage had been dressed with oversized banners and golden tassels. Jenna found a seat near the back, unnoticed. Her hair was pulled into a low bun. No lipstick, no accessories, just presence. Up front, she spotted her parents bustling around Avery like she was royalty. Deborah fussed over her daughter's gown, patting stray hairs, while James straightened his tie for what must have been the fifth time. Avery smirked through the attention, her posture practiced, her smile performative. Then the slideshow began. On the large screen came a flood of images. Avery as a toddler in ruffled swimsuits. Avery in cheer uniforms. Avery blowing out birthday candles surrounded by glittering balloons. There were family trips to Lake Tahoe, 4th of July backyard barbecues, and Christmas mornings in matching plaid pajamas. Jenna's face was nowhere. Not in the background, not even in a blurry corner. It wasn't just an oversight, it was deliberate. She didn't flinch, not anymore. But something in her chest felt heavy with knowing, a dull ache she hadn't named since she was 16. After the ceremony, Jenna lingered by the flower stand, ready to slip away unnoticed. But Deborah caught her by the arm like a stage manager late on cue. "There you are. Come take a photo with your sister. We'll post it on Facebook. Let everyone see how close you two are." Jenna followed instinctively. Avery stood under a blooming dogwood tree, her cap tilted slightly, scrolling her phone with a bored expression. She barely looked up. Deborah raised her phone, smiling too wide, and Jenna stepped back. "I don't want to pretend," she said softly. Deborah blinked. "Pretend what?" "That we're something we're not. I'm not going to keep playing a part just because it fits your story." The words weren't sharp. They weren't angry. But they landed like a door closing. For a moment, no one moved. Then Avery looked away, and Deborah's smile faltered, her hand lowering slowly as if the phone had grown too heavy. Jenna didn't wait for a reply. She walked off the lawn with the quiet certainty of someone who no longer needed permission to leave. That evening, back in Spokane, Jenna kicked off her shoes and tossed her keys onto the counter of her shared studio loft. The city buzzed faintly outside, her backpack slumped against a stool. Mail fanned out on the counter, half junk, half bills, until her fingers paused on one envelope. It was heavy, white, stamped with the golden seal of the Washington State Office of Innovation and Public Design. She opened it. Inside was a formal letter. The state of Washington invites Ms. Jenna Whitlow to serve as keynote speaker at the 2024 graduation ceremony for students in applied design and environmental planning. Jenna blinked, rereading the words. The letter detailed her selection, not just for her academic excellence, but as the first undergrad to create and scale a sustainable design model while still in school. Her work with Studio Line 9 had reached policy boards, grant committees, and now the state itself. The final line made her breath catch. The ceremony will be broadcast statewide to inspire future leaders in design. She didn't cry. She didn't text anyone. She didn't call her mother. She just sat on the edge of her couch, the letter in her lap, and let the moment settle into her like sunlight through a window. No one in Bozeman needed to be told. They would see it. Not in a family slideshow, but live. On television, where even James Whitlow, sitting on that same couch he always sat on, arms crossed, remote in hand, would have to watch his daughter speak. And this time, he wouldn't be able to look away. Glenridge Civic Hall buzzed like a beehive in spring. Light spilled through tall arched windows, cameras rolled quietly in the back, and hundreds of students waited in their caps and gowns. June Whitlow stood just behind the stage curtain, calm but resolute. She wasn't here for attention. She was here because she earned her place, on her own. The announcer's voice cut through the murmurs. Our keynote speaker and recipient of the Applied Innovation Honor, June Whitlow. As she stepped out, applause erupted. She wore a plain black blazer over jeans and the same worn boots that walked her through every late-night class and morning shift. Her voice was clear. Good afternoon. First, congratulations to everyone here. You made it. And if you're like me, you probably paid for that seat yourself. A stillness fell. When people say, "We believe in you," they usually mean it until they have to prove it. I worked nights, cleaned offices, and fixed printers to be here. I know what it feels like to be invisible at your own kitchen table but seen by a professor who barely knows your name. She clicked the remote. Behind her, images rolled. Her sketches, the rebuild of her garage-turned-studio, and playgrounds she'd designed for underserved kids. Design isn't about blueprints. It's about giving space to people told they don't belong. At home, Carla clutched the edge of the couch. Dennis stared at the screen, lips parted. Lexi scoffed quietly, but no one responded. On stage, June's voice softened. "You don't have to wait for someone to give you a place at the table. You can build your own." And I did. Applause thundered. A young girl from the audience approached her with teary eyes. "You just told my story. Thank you." June smiled, holding her tightly. "You're not invisible anymore." The next day, June got a call from Carla. "Sweetheart," Carla's voice syrupy and strained, "we're hosting a family dinner. For you. To celebrate." Dennis chimed in awkwardly. "Let's put the past behind us. It was all a big misunderstanding." June waited, then replied, "I'll come. But I'm bringing someone," and she sits at the table. They hesitated. "Of course," Carla said quickly. That night in Winston-Salem, June entered in a navy dress beside Ava Reyes, her business partner, and maybe more. The air inside the house was staged, the table perfect. Lexi barely lifted her eyes. Dennis dove into small talk about June's community projects, hinting at future collaborations. "We've got city connections. Might help you expand," he offered. June smiled politely. "We're careful who we align with." Carla lifted a glass. "See? This is what matters. Family." June gently set her fork down and pulled out an envelope. Inside, an official partnership letter from the State Development Board with one bold line. "We do not engage with affiliates of Dennis Whitlow due to ongoing conflict of interest investigations." Dennis paled. Carla stammered. Then came the second document, a funding agreement for students financially abandoned by their families. June's voice was calm. "I didn't come for closure. I came to make it clear. I'm not asking for a seat at your table. I built mine." She stood. Ava rose with her. At the door, June turned one last time. "Family isn't blood, it's belief." And she left. Late sunlight streaked across the wooden floor of H+ Studio in downtown Glen Ridge. June sat by the window sipping jasmine tea. Her sketchbook was open to a new project, an urban garden where kids could grow vegetables beside solar panels. Above her desk hung an old page. "If one day you feel unloved, build a place where love doesn't have to ask permission." She had written it at 18. Now it had a frame. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lexi. "I'm sorry. I'm here if you ever want to talk." June didn't reply, but she didn't delete it either. That evening, over dinner and blueprints, June looked at Ava. "There are names we stop saying to breathe, and meals we leave to cook our first real one." Ava just nodded. Later, they hung a wooden sign outside the studio, H+ Studio, where the unseen are remembered. June stepped out as the sun dipped behind the hills. The air smelled like rain and cedar. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had already arrived. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to believe in us the most are the very ones who make us question our worth. But healing doesn't always come from an apology. It comes from building a life so full of truth that silence no longer hurts. We learn to choose ourselves, to create tables where we're no longer begging for a seat, but offering one to those who truly see us. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, share your journey, and don't forget to follow the channel for more stories that speak to the heart.